On a tempestuous night in Willow Creek, Ethan, a mechanic weighed down by relentless struggles, made a choice that would forever redefine his fate. As the storm lashed against his truck, he spotted her, a woman, drenched and desperate beside a broken-down car, illuminated by the faint glow of hazard lights. Driven by instinct and compassion, he stopped, unaware that this single act would ignite a chain of events beyond his wildest imagination. 2 days later, the roar of a descending helicopter shattered the quiet of his neighborhood, leaving Ethan's world forever transformed. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let's get started. Ethan's life in Willow Creek was as unyielding as the wrenches he used daily. At the local garage, he spent long hours repairing broken engines, wiping oil-streaked hands on threadbare rags. Each day blurred into the next, a cycle of relentless labor and modest paychecks barely enough to keep the lights on in his small, aging home. Yet Ethan never complained. He'd grown accustomed to the grind, his resilience shaped by years of hardship. That night, as he finished another exhausting shift, the rain greeted him like an old adversary. His truck, battered but reliable, groaned as he navigated the slick streets. The dim glow of the town's streetlights barely pierced the downpour, leaving the roads shadowed and foreboding. Despite his fatigue, Ethan remained alert, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Little did he know, fate was steering him toward a moment that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his life. Through the storm's relentless curtain, Ethan's headlights caught a figure, alone, shivering and drenched. A broken-down car sat beside her, hazard lights flickering weakly. Ethan slowed his truck, the sound of tires slicing through puddles filling the silence inside his cab. He debated for a split second. He was exhausted, and the weather was merciless. But something in her posture, the desperation she couldn't hide, pulled at him. Pulling over, Ethan grabbed his coat and stepped into the downpour. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice raised to cut through the rain. The woman turned, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "It just died," she explained, gesturing helplessly at the car. Ethan nodded, quickly assessing the situation. "It's probably the battery," he said, already retrieving jumper cables from his truck. Working swiftly under the pelting rain, he managed to restart the engine. The woman, who introduced herself as Victoria, thanked him profusely. "Please let me pay you for this," she insisted. Ethan waved her off with a tired smile. "Don't worry about it. Just pay it forward someday." As he returned to his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. 2 days later, Ethan was in the middle of changing an engine belt at the garage when his phone buzzed on the workbench. It was his neighbor, breathless and frantic. "Ethan! You need to get home. There's a helicopter in front of your house." "A helicopter?" The words didn't make sense. Ethan laughed it off at first, thinking it must be some mistake. But the urgency in his neighbor's voice gnawed at him. Wiping his grease-streaked hands on his overalls, he grabbed his keys and headed out, his mind racing with possibilities. As he turned onto his street, his jaw dropped. Parked on his modest gravel driveway was a sleek, black helicopter. The powerful blades had stopped spinning, but the sheer presence of it seemed to hum with authority. Standing beside the aircraft were 3 people in crisp suits, their gazes fixed on him as if they'd been waiting for hours. Ethan parked his truck cautiously, his heart pounding. One of the men stepped forward, his demeanor calm but purposeful. "Mr. Ethan," he began, extending an envelope. "This is for you. It's from Victoria." "Victoria?" Ethan took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. The man smiled faintly and added, "She asked that we bring you to Silveridge Estate." Ethan stared at the envelope, his thoughts spiraling. What could this possibly mean? The rhythmic hum of the helicopter blades filled Ethan's ears as he clutched the envelope tighter. Outside, the modest homes and weathered streets of Willow Creek disappeared beneath him, replaced by sweeping hills and vast stretches of untouched land. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. Just 2 days ago, he was fixing cars under the flickering lights of the garage. Now, He was being flown to meet a woman he'd helped during a storm. The envelope in his hands, bearing the initials VM, felt heavier with every mile. As they approached the destination, Ethan's breath caught. Silveridge Estate sprawled below, a grand mansion nestled in lush greenery, its fountains sparkling in the late afternoon sun. The estate seemed otherworldly, a stark contrast to his small home. "This can't be real," Ethan murmured to himself, his heart pounding as the helicopter descended onto the pristine helipad. When the rotors finally stilled, Ethan stepped out hesitantly, his boots crunching against the stone driveway. A group of staff members greeted him politely but formally, guiding him toward the mansion's towering oak doors. Every step he took felt surreal. The grandeur of the estate, the manicured gardens, the marble statues lining the path, the sprawling windows reflecting the fading sunlight, was overwhelming. Inside, the opulence only deepened. The foyer's marble floors gleamed, and massive chandeliers cast soft light across the intricately designed ceiling. Ethan couldn't help but feel out of place. His grease-streaked jeans and worn boots stood in stark contrast to the polished surroundings. Down a long, sunlit corridor, a figure awaited him, Victoria. Gone was the rain-soaked woman he had met 2 nights ago. In her place stood a poised, elegant figure, her tailored dress and confident posture radiating authority. Yet her warm smile carried a sincerity that put Ethan slightly at ease. "Ethan," Victoria said as she extended her hand, her voice calm but welcoming. "I'm so glad you're here." Ethan shook her hand awkwardly, still unsure of what to say. I wasn't expecting all this," he admitted, glancing around the room with wide eyes. Victoria gestured for him to follow her into a spacious sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's immaculate gardens. Ethan hesitated but complied, the envelope still clutched tightly in his hand. "Ethan," Victoria began, her tone softening, "I brought you here because of what you did that night. In the rain, you stopped to help me, a complete stranger, without asking for anything in return. You reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. That kindness still exists, even in the smallest moments." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It really wasn't a big deal," he said, looking down at the envelope. "I just thought you needed help." Victoria smiled knowingly. "That's what makes it special. Most people would have driven past without a second thought. But not you. And because of that, I wanted to thank you, not just with words, but with an opportunity to change your life." She gestured toward a polished wooden table nearby. On it rested another thick envelope alongside a gleaming wooden box. "These," she said, her voice steady, "are just the beginning. But first, let's talk about what brought you here today." Ethan blinked, overwhelmed by her words and the sheer enormity of the moment. Victoria's words hung in the air, their weight almost tangible. Ethan shifted uneasily in his seat, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not sure what you mean by change my life," he said carefully, his fingers still gripping the envelope she had given him. Victoria smiled gently, sensing his hesitation. "Let me explain," she said, rising to her feet and walking to the table. She picked up the thick envelope and handed it to him. "This," she said, "contains enough money for you to finally breathe. No more late nights wondering if you'll make rent, no more worrying about whether your truck will last another year." Ethan opened the envelope cautiously, his eyes widening as he glimpsed the figure on the check inside. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. I can't take this," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria shook her head firmly. "You can and you should," she replied. "This isn't just a gift, Ethan. It's an acknowledgement of the kindness you showed me when you didn't have to. But," she added, her tone shifting slightly, "there's more." She turned back to the table and picked up the wooden box. Inside was a gleaming set of keys. "This is for you as well," she said, placing the box in front of him. "A new truck, fully equipped and ready to replace the one you've been holding together with duct tape and prayers." Ethan let out a soft laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is too much. I was just doing what anyone would do," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. Victoria sat back down, her expression earnest. No, Ethan. What you did wasn't what anyone would do. Most people would have driven by, pretending not to see me in the rain. But you didn't. And that's why I'm offering you more than just money or a truck. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his. I want you to work with me. I run a network of community programs, initiatives to help people rebuild their lives, find stability, and create opportunities. Someone like you, with your skills and your heart, could make a real difference. Ethan's breath hitched. Work with you? I don't know anything about programs or anything outside fixing cars, he admitted, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what she was offering. Victoria nodded. That's why I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. This offer will always stand, whether it's tomorrow, next month, or next year. But know this, Ethan, you have the chance to step into something extraordinary. As the words sank in, Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, the possibilities seemed endless. The drive home from Silveridge Estate was a blur. Ethan sat in his truck, the envelope and box resting on the passenger seat, their presence almost too heavy to bear. His mind churned with questions and doubts. Could he accept such a life-altering gift? Did he even deserve it? The next few days passed in a haze. Ethan returned to the garage, but his routine felt strangely foreign now. Fixing engines and wiping grease from his hands didn't carry the same sense of purpose it once had. His thoughts kept drifting back to Victoria's words. You have the chance to step into something extraordinary. One evening, Ethan sat on his small porch, the thick envelope in his lap. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over Willow Creek, but he barely noticed. Opening the envelope, he pulled out the check again, his breath hitching at the sheer amount. It was enough to pay off every debt, fix his home, and still have more left than he'd ever dreamed. Yet it wasn't the money that weighed on him most, it was the opportunity. Victoria's belief in him stirred something buried deep within, hope. For years, Ethan had resigned himself to a life of quiet struggle, never imagining he could do more than just survive. But now, the idea of doing something meaningful, of helping others, gnawed at him in a way he couldn't ignore. With trembling hands, he reached for the small card Victoria had included in the envelope. Her number was printed neatly, accompanied by a simple note. Whenever you're ready. Ethan stared at the card for a long moment before finally dialing. His heart pounded as the line connected. Victoria? It's Ethan, he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. I've made my decision. I'd like to take you up on your offer. The relief and excitement in Victoria's voice were unmistakable. I knew you would, Ethan. Welcome to the next chapter of your life. As Ethan hung up, a rare smile spread across his face. For the first time in years, he felt like the road ahead was not just a path, but a promise. Ethan's new life began the moment he stepped into Silveridge Estate, this time not as a guest, but as a part of something greater. Working alongside Victoria, he discovered a world far beyond engines and tools, a world where his skills and compassion could transform lives. The programs she ran were unlike anything Ethan had known. Together, they helped struggling families repair their homes, offered free mechanical training to unemployed workers, and built community spaces for those in need. Each day brought new challenges, but for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of purpose that was deeply fulfilling. On one quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood on the terrace of Silveridge Estate, overlooking the lush gardens bathed in golden light. He reflected on how a single act of kindness, a decision to stop in the rain, had led him to this moment. Life hadn't just changed for him, he had become a catalyst for change in others' lives as well. Kindness, he realized, was more powerful than he'd ever imagined. It didn't just ripple, it surged, connecting lives and reshaping futures. As the story of Ethan and Victoria reminds us, even the smallest actions can create extraordinary transformations. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing, where more tales like this await. Together, let's keep the ripple of kindness alive.